Mr. Chairman, H.R. 8205, the Keeping Violent Offenders Off Our Streets Act, is yet another vehicle for Republican campaign messaging that does nothing to help the American people. This bill, which would amend the federal insurance fraud statute to define, quote, the business of insurance, unquote, to include the posting of any kind of monetary bail, does nothing to address violent crime despite its title. It is simply another attempt by Republicans to claim that Democrats are soft on crime and to distract the American people from the indisputable fact that crime is down across this country and it has been down for several years. Instead of leaving state interests to the states, this bill appears to target nonprofit bail funds that try to address the clear inequities that result when people without financial means are held pending trial, simply because they cannot afford to pay the bail amounts set by the court. Nonprofit bail funds, the Minnesota Freedom Fund in particular, have become a target of Republicans recently as they desperately try to prop up their failing presidential candidate by attacking Vice President Harris and Governor Walz. Former President Trump has repeatedly and falsely claimed that Vice President Harris donated to the Minnesota Freedom Fund and that her donation secured the release of a man who went on to commit murder. This is nothing more than another made-up story the Republican ticket has created, and that is just as false as the former president's claim that immigrants are eating dogs and cats in Springfield, Ohio. The Minnesota Freedom Fund has confirmed that Vice President Harris has never donated to them, and that her only relationship to the fund was a 2020 tweet encouraging people to, quote, chip in if they were able, 2 years before the release of the individual who committed a murder that the Republicans baselessly blame on Vice President Harris. The majority's attempt to link this murder to the Vice President demonstrates that Republicans are willing to politicize even the most heinous crimes to serve their desperate needs. We know from experience and from actual data that when you put the political rhetoric aside, Democratic policies work to reduce crime. Homicides are down across the country. Violent crimes are down. Property crimes are down. We learned just last week that even drug overdoses are down this year substantially. And while my Republican colleagues love to criticize policies aimed at eliminating or reducing our justice system's reliance on cash bail, study after study, including a recent comprehensive study by the Brennan Center of 33 jurisdictions, shows that bail reform has not led to an increase in crime. The underlying premise of this bill, that bail policies have increased violent crime, is fatally flawed. But that is not the only problem with this legislation. Another problem is that the insurance fraud statute that this bill seeks to amend applies only to, quote, the business of insurance, close quote, that, quote, affects interstate commerce, which the posting of bail by a state or local bail fund does not do. The bill also applies to entities that post any bond, including non-criminal immigration bonds, which has nothing to do with violent crime. In fact, the provision of this bill as originally introduced that actually attempted to address violent crime was stripped from the bill in committee. All that remains is the provision relating to insurance fraud. I challenge my Republican colleagues to explain how exactly subjecting state and local bail organizations to federal insurance regulations and federal criminal penalties will reduce violent crime, when the vast majority of the bonds they post are for nonviolent crimes, and when these organizations are already regulated by their own states. My Republican colleagues like to cite individual examples of people who committed violent offenses after being bailed out by nonprofit bail funds. Each case is tragic, and our hearts go out to the victims and their families. But they won't tell you about the thousands more who received help from these funds, finished their cases, and moved on with their lives without incident. They won't tell you about people who commit crimes after being released with the help of commercial bail agents. And they will not tell you that it is a judge, not a bail fund, who decides whether to set cash bail in a given case, and if so, in what amount. Bail funds simply allow indigent defendants to obtain a release that a court has already deemed to be appropriate. We must remember that we cannot ask for or expect perfection from our bail system. What we can do is to make sure that the solutions we propose for violent crime are actually targeted to address the problem rather than to provide sound bites for social media. There is no question that we must address the root causes of violent crime, invest in proven solutions such as community violence intervention and drug treatment, And we must also support law enforcement with funding and other resources, rather than attacking the FBI, the ATF, and their other federal partners relentlessly. Furthermore, if we are going to subject state and local bail organizations to federal regulation, we must do so only after a hearing to explore whether increased federal regulation of bail as insurance will advance our shared goal of keeping Americans safe. Unfortunately, this bill was rushed to markup without regular order. If and when the majority decides to get serious about combating violence in America, I will gladly join them in exploring serious solutions. But this legislation is no solution at all. I urge the committee to reject this flawed legislation. I would also point out that we have in New York a rather well-known case of a defendant accused of serious felonies, released on bail pending trial, and after conviction, released on bail pending sentence. And he is still on bail. I refer, of course, to Donald Trump. I urge the committee to reject this flawed legislation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Nadler, I think it's a shame that you come in here, talking about the presidential candidates the way you do. I will tell you that we had an unethical prosecutor in the state of Georgia bring charges against him too.
Say again?
We had an unethical prosecutor bring charges against him in Georgia too.
I don't think it's been shown that that prosecutor is unethical.
Oh, you haven't?
No.
You think it's appropriate for her to have an affair with someone that she hired to handle the prosecution?
I think not, but I think it didn't affect the prosecution, and I think the court, and I think the judge ruled so.
You guys have hunted that man and hunted that man and hunted that man. This is the United States of America. We are not supposed to conduct ourselves. It's my time. This is my time, Mr. Nadler, and I'll let you respond.
Okay.
But the Democratic Party has been on a political hunt against Donald Trump before he was ever the President of the United States. Before he was ever the President of the United States. They were tapping his phones in his campaigns and everything else. I mean, it is certainly agencies under the control of Democrats, but it is, I mean, I don't know if Kamala Harris told him to chip in or not. You said it would be Senator Harris at the time, right? You said Senator Harris encouraged him to chip in to the not-for-profit.
I assume she was senator at the time, or maybe Attorney General of California, I'm not sure.
Well, it was 2020, right?
2020, she was senator.
She was senator, right? But she was out of the presidential election already at that stage, right? She came out in 19.
Yes, I believe so.
Yes, she came out because she didn't make it to the actual debates and all. I thought we were prohibited from encouraging people to contribute to charities as members of Congress. I didn't think we were supposed to do that. I didn't think we were supposed to use our offices to encourage people to contribute to charities.
I'm not aware of that at all.
Did I miss something there? I think if you had an existing relationship with one before you were elected,
I think members of Congress.
Look, this is
members of
whatever.
Congress.
I'm gonna turn it over to you, Mr. McGovern. You can ask any questions you've got.
I thank you both for being here. I'd like to get this over with. Thank you. I yield back.
Would the real chair like to ask any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.